My name is Rick Mason. For everybody on here, if they don't know, John is going to give us a introduction to Docker, and I wanted to announce that we have Randy Brown, who hasn't logged in here yet, is going to be giving our next meeting on a project where he integrated ColdFusion and Microsoft Teams. And then in April, we have a return visitor, although he's returning virtually, Ray Camden, a name that most of you know, who is going to be doing an introduction to the Jamstack. So,
cool.
Yep, and then for those of you that are joining as well, if you do have any questions or want to say something, just use the chat function. So that's under the show conversation tab. You can click on there and then enter in your chat, and we'll make sure that John's aware of it.
The chat function is right here.
Yep.
So, let's see who we have here tonight. Let's see, when you do these, aren't you supposed to start off like, those of you who are older will know what I mean. You go to these things, it's like, okay, we have someone here from this place and that place. Like, my word, it's like adult romper room. So these webinars really crack me up because every time I think of romper room when they get started on that. But I don't have a magic mirror. Sorry, guys. But I would like to, if you guys who are here could chip in and let me know what your background is with Docker or what your interest is. I would like to target that for those who are here and those who get the recording. They didn't give me the input in advance, so I'm sorry if I don't get your, I don't have ESP as far as what your background is. So how about it? Any of you guys on want to unmute or just type in the chat and let me know what your interests are? Other than Docker has a lot of hype right now. Nobody.
no, we had one.
There's a few people that are chatting. They don't have access to turn on the mic.
I had to swap over. I was on the people. I had to swap to chat.
Yeah, there's people in the chat.
Let's see. Noob never used it. Let's see. Okay. Well, let me swap to my screen. Let's see, you see my screen, correct?
Yep, we see the whiteboard right now.
Okay, yeah.
You see that?
Yep.
Yeah, I do that, sorry. I had to have a, it's normal, it is a whiteboard, but I made it a blackboard because I had to go with a modern, everything's dark mode, so you know. I will say, as much as I like dark mode, the main thing I hate about dark mode is you can never see which tab is selected. They need to get that figured out. Okay, so I'm going to go chalk talk style for those who also remember that. In the old days, we used to have these computers that sat on the desktop. And inside these, we had a old hard drive in there. And they would take these drives out and they would make a copy of them. Does anyone know what that copy used to be called? And then they could make several copies off that copy and put that into a bunch of other systems. These, they would burn an image. and that was a copy of the hard drive, and then they would spin other machines up that same way. Hello, Randy. And that's how it got the name image when they started doing Docker, because it's an old school term. The difference is nowadays our images are virtual. So when we put this on a cloud style computer and you spin that image up, well, it starts out as an image, but when you fire it up, that's what we call a container. All a container is the image that's now running. So there's something important here that you have to understand with Docker right off. Because when you're using Docker, and let's say that running container, you shut it off in the cloud. Well, think about this computer you have over here. Whoops, guess what? I want to undo that. I'm going to try that again. Okay, so this computer we have over here, well, if you turn a computer off and back on, everything here is still there. When you do the same thing in the cloud and you turn it off, it no longer exists. So everything that was on the hard drive goes away. So I will be talking tonight and explaining how with Docker you can shut an image off and still hold everything that was in memory. That's a very important thing. That's done with volumes or mounts, which is just a more detailed way of doing volume type work. So let's see, what else will we be talking about? So we see here again, so we spin it back up. And what we're going to do is we're going to create an alias. So there's this little section of your hard drive. We'll say in your hard drive, this section is, what do we want to call it? Say you have a dev folder up here inside your container. Well, what we're going to do is that's running in the cloud in Docker. Let's say inside of our stuff here, we have volume dev. Well, what we do is we create an alias, so when the container sees dev here, it looks down here, and we're going to persist that data on an outside drive. By doing that, every time this container boots up, well, your dev folder is still there. When you actually create an image to put into production, we rarely do this because you bake those files right into your drive. But when you're in development, you're changing these constantly and you don't want your drive or contain. You guys may have done this before. Has anyone ever written code and crashed your system, the server or anything like that? Shortly before I met Rick and spoke to the group for the first time, I moved up to Michigan, and they had hired me because they wanted to do all this stuff they wanted to do commerce, and it was new, and Casio was wanting to jump onto commerce, Apple was wanting to jump onto commerce, and they hired me to help get that all spun up for those companies, which was really cool. Looks great in your resume. I was in the right place at the right time. A lot of guys could have done it, but it was cool that I got to build Apple's first commerce site. But, so I came in, I'm the supposed expert, and all of a sudden, my first week when I'm coding, everyone started to complain because we did all our coding on a shared server at that time, and it started to crash. Somebody wrote an infinite loop. It was me. So maybe you have never crashed the server. But yeah, I did it for the whole team on my first week there. So they asked me if I mind recording the meeting. Yeah, I'm used to embarrassing myself, so. But you can learn a lot. They say in lean startup, fail early, fail often, pivot. I try to be better. The better you are at pivots, the less time you spend in failure modes. So when we're developing, we're writing our code over here in Visual Studio Code or whatever your editor is. You're writing your code here. You start up the container up here, and the container is looking at your code. When you actually go to deliver it, you stop using this, and you'll just bake it right in here. So that's the difference between doing Docker development and having a Docker container that you deploy. Gotta love the tools. So, any questions on that so far? I'm watching now.
There is a question, looks like from Peter.
Let's see. There it is. Am I at the wrong end? I may have missed it. I don't see it. Read it to me and I'll.
Actually, Peter just had his hand up there, so Peter, you can mute your mic now if you want to ask.
Go ahead. I see it. Yes.
Oh, I guess
he wanted to give me a high five.
Excellent.
So, Docker has been around for a few years, and they're not the original container company. They're just the ones that streamlined it and made it so it was friendlier. And I'm probably spelling this wrong. Is it ME? Well, it's either MA or ME, Mirantis. About a year ago, Docker used to have a thing called Docker Enterprise. And they also have a orchestration tool like Kubernetes you've probably heard of called Swarm. Well, these were their business things that they were using to generate most of their money. But they started out as a company building tools and more building the open source stuff. So they had all this open source stuff they were doing, and they were doing this, and they weren't doing good doing both of them side by side. So Mirantis came along, made them an offer, and all of these things went over to Mirantis. Now Docker is back to doing what they're doing, and they're doing a really good job at it. So the question one would ask is, with this, how in the world, since Docker doesn't sell a whole lot of products, how are they making money? Well, one of the ways they do it is with Docker Hub. You will see later that most of us, you'll put a command in the command prompt. So you'll make that better, Docker run, and say you'll put node. Okay? Well, if you don't tell it where the file is, and it just sees the name of the image you want to pull and run as a container, it goes to Docker Hub. It checks to see if that image is available on Docker Hub, and it pulls that down into your cloud, whether you're running this and wherever you're running your Docker containers. And node spins up. So Hub has stuff that's free, and it's sort of like GitHub. GitHub. GitHub, you can put your source code up there for free, or you can buy a fancier package if you want. But who has ever noticed that GitHub is very, very generous? Well, the same thing is true of Docker with their hub. Their system is also very generous. And I'm going to flip over there and show you, whoop, wrong screen. You know what? I'll just go like that. So this is where my account is over there in different little files that I've been playing with. Let's see, like Node was one that. So what you will see here is you can go looking for all kinds of server images because this is a repository of them. They have lots of different things in here. And as you come down, see this one has something slash and then a name. Well, each of these normally will have a slash, but if these containers are so commonly used and broadly shared, then what you will find out is there's no slash in front of it. But you can go in here, and this is where developers and non-developers go to grab pre-built things. And you can see in some cases they have some good documentation. In some cases they don't. And the documentation will be free, different in all of these. And these are the images that have been built. And you see here Docker pull. That's how you pull a copy of this image to your machine. Now, what does that mean? So again, so up here in this cloud, we have Docker Hub. And down here, we'll say in your machine, you're running Docker Desktop. So what you do is there's two phases. There's the pull and there's the run. Now, when you call run, if the image isn't there, it'll do the pull automatically for you. So what it'll do is if you were calling node, you want to run node here. Well, before you can run the node container, remember what I said, you have to have the image. Oh, make that an E. That's a bad E. Watch this. There we go. So what you do is you'll write in there Docker pull node, and it goes up here, finds it, pulls it back down, and if you did run, that's how you do that. Now, this is, you can learn the command line to do a lot of this stuff, but I have a different way to do this, and that's what I think is a lot better. And if you talk to most of the Docker captains, which are like the community leaders who have done a lot of community work, and Docker gives them a certificate and honors them. So when you hear the word Docker captain, they're just community leaders. We will show you.
John, how do you know which version you're getting? Node has many versions.
Node does have many versions. And let's put a pin in that because I definitely want to answer that. But I'm going to show you along that lines here.
Okay.
I'm going to show you Traefik tonight. Notice this. See, that's a version. So Traefik, just like Node, is so commonly used that they have it without the prefix. But see here, Portainer. Well, this is the Portainer repository with the Portainer image. And again, see this prefix. I mean, post, whatever, that's the version number. So that's how you select the version number you're going to pull. What we have here is called a Docker compose file. And I could go into the command line and go and manage all of this stuff. I want to set up a network for Jenkins, a network for Portainer, you know, for registry. I could go in there and just go wild on that. Well, actually, those are volumes. That's where I was talking to you earlier. When I do this and I start the container and then I stop it and I come back to it, all the data and stuff that I have in these servers persist even if I turn my machine off and come back to it. Unless I turn my machine off wrong and ruin my machine, but Docker doesn't solve that problem. So here's different networks that I've set up, and things, if they're on the same network, they can see each other's resources. So we'll collapse those, and we'll go back here and look at Traefik again. Let's see. What do we have up there? Yep, I've deleted those. I'm gonna just take those off. I moved those to another location, so I can show you that they don't all have to be in the same file. I moved those this afternoon so I could show that to you. But Traefik is a server. And what Traefik does is Traefik lets me on my local network work with another tool called MKCert. And I did an MKCert install, and then I do another MKCert instruction that creates my secure certificates to run locally. In doing that and using Docker, I can set this TLS equals true. And when I run a service that's based on that, which I will. There we go. This is my Traefik server that's running on this machine in Docker. And it has all kinds of information. But what I want you to see is this part. My connection is secure. I have HTTPS running secure local. You would not use this for going live, but I'm talking about doing Docker development, developing with Docker. It would be a different talk about how to secure stuff up online. What's neat about this, excuse me, is see this label here? By using these labels, the stuff you would normally put in Apache or Nginx or IIS and run around all your containers and everything. When you want to set this up, all I do is when I start this up, Docker is looking at this Docker sock tool, and that lets it see what things are being started and which ones aren't. So when it starts up or it spins down, Traefik watches. And you see this URL here, this domain. Well, yes, I do have to set that up for it to see it, but this is when I'm doing local development here, this is my local fake development domain. And the Traefik is running on that domain. So using the MKCert from your command line and creating some certificates, which is this and this. So yes, now someone can see my cert and grab the code. Normally you would not publicly show those, but since nobody can see them, there is no security hack there because I plan on regenerating those anyways. So with that, that's how I spin up this cert. Now I want to show you the Docker desktop. This is something else we use as developers. So welcome to Docker desktop. You spin it up and you see here's this DevOps, and inside here you see Traefik, you see Portainer. Now what I'm going to do normally when you first load, You won't see that. You'll come in and this is what you see. Now, another thing you'll see, it used to be you had to buy Windows Pro or Windows Enterprise to run this if you're running on Windows. But Microsoft has worked extensively with the Docker company, done a partnership level effort with them. And they had this thing called Windows System Linux. And Windows System Linux 2 is really functional. And you can run a straight Windows Home Edition and run the containers on Windows with that. And that was all I wanted to. And you see it has, here's your Windows System Linux integration. I have Ubuntu running on here. And for those of you who have not seen it, I'll pull it over here just so you can see this. So here you go. This is your standard so it is actually using Linux for running containers. You can run containers as Windows containers. One of the reasons you might not want to run Windows containers is there is a whole lot more servers that are being done with Linux than there is Windows. But, and this upgrade button here, that's for getting enterprise levels of service at Docker Hub. You can see I have my SOS apps here. So, because that's the name of my hub resources at Docker. So this is pretty good. Now what I want to do is going to pull that up here for just a moment. Okay. Docker Compose, which is what this file is here. I'm going to bring it up. And so it lets go of the command line. You do a -D, which means detach after you bring these up. So you see it just added all of those back there. Now this is in a folder in my hard drive called DevOps. So by default, it'll name this stack DevOps. So you can see here, this is one way to get in here and see what's going on. I am going to now, let's see, Portainer, open in browser. Now you see here, it looks like it didn't open it right. That's because it hit on 8,000. When it has more than one port, you will find it doesn't always open to the right port. Now this is opening to localhost, but as you can see, this connection isn't secure. What I did is when I set this up, I also set this up in the compose file with the TLLS, and I gave it a domain so that I could access that. And you have to tell it which port you're going to go to. So that's the secret sauce. I just set those settings in here. And when Traefik spun up, you can see, here we go. So here's the Portainer SoQuest LAN. And you see it has TLS, so it has a secure capability. Also, I put in here, another thing Traefik will do is redirect. There's lots of nice things it will do. And it reroutes it. So we'll come back here. And we'll go the secure way, which is my preference. There we go. And this is Portainer. I'll go into my stack. You see we have 7 containers running here. This is the same information. This is a tool that a lot of developers use while they're in development side. You may choose different tools if you're off your local machine. And if you go and look here, you will also see this gives you a lot of information. So if you're using labels like we were just talking about, this shows you all the labels that are set for this, any environment variables that are set, the commands that was spun up when a container started, the different ports it has, and just lots of good information, including logs. If something's going wrong and you want to see what the logs are that are being fed to the default console on that server, well, it kicks out the logs here too. So now I will say this.
We got a couple questions.
Okay. If you are using the logs and you're trying to watch them live, this up here is a really important thing to do. Turn it off so it doesn't keep refreshing and you can't scroll back and forth. All right, let me see if I can find Teams. Okay, what are the questions? Paul.
Okay. Paul asked if you're running containerized CFML apps in production or you're using Docker primarily for local dev.
I personally am helping the company convert over that I'm working for right now to Docker. They are not there yet, but I know Ortus is running in Docker, and Ortus runs all their containers in a swarm. As far as their orchestrator, they're not using Kubernetes. When you get into very large, complex things, Kubernetes is worth it. And the other side of Swarm is, even though Swarm is a very valid business tool, since Mirantis purchased those resources, they haven't really added anything fantastic to Swarm in the year that they've owned it. So unless something changes there, you may want to start with Swarm for doing simple stuff, but you're probably going to want to learn Kubernetes. And while you're learning Kubernetes, you will hate them for not developing Swarm further. Because Kubernetes gets very complex. So, but you don't need to know how to be a systems administrator and run Kubernetes to develop. You just have to build a container that they can launch on the system.
Okay, I got a couple questions. You mentioned Portainer, but you didn't find exactly what it was.
Okay, Portainer is a tool that lets you see what's running, and everything that I spun up in that one Docker compose file, it created in my development system what we call a stack. So here's all those images that were in that stack. You can also see here's the image that is running as this container, right down to the version number. You can also, while you're here, see all the images that I have on this machine, including ones that are unused. So over here, I could go over here to some of these unused images and clean it up. So that's another thing this is good for. But this isn't the only place to do that, because I'm guessing you guys have used Visual Studio Code before. If you add the extension for Docker, then you get something very similar over here. These are all the images. So these up here are the running containers. So like we said, we had Traefik there, and that's the file system inside there. And you see here we have something called registry. Well, let me show you what that is. On localhost here, I'm running a registry. And see, here's a copy of MySQL, the image that I've stored locally on this machine. So you can run your own local container, sorry, your own local image repository. You do not have to use Docker Hub. And one of the advantages to that is it can be faster for pulling stuff, or you may want to develop stuff that you don't want to put online. So there are options there. So you can store your stuff local here. As you can see, I've got way too many images just sitting there. And again, you have to have an image local before you can actually spin it up. And see, it gives you metadata on this. Another neat thing you can do over here is if you right-click on this, I can view the logs right inside Visual Studio Code with this. So depending on your style, you could use the stuff that's available from Docker Desktop, which is improving regular. They're trying to come up to speed and compete with these tools now that they're no longer split in their focus. You can use Portainer or a tool like that to work through the command line, or you can also do it here. Or if you want, and you just really like doing it, Docker image, and see from the command prompt, you can do the same type of thing. Docker container, ls, that's all my running containers with information. You can check volumes the same way, if you can type. Or, well,
it's Docker volume. It's not volumes, it's volume.
I was just about to go look, but
that was one of the changes a while ago.
So you can see I have lots of stuff sitting and working in there. So, and there are commands to clean it up, etc. But if you start having to, if you prefer to run from the command line, you can do it. If you prefer to run from the browser as a developer, you can do it. If you prefer to run from the Docker Hub tool, you can do that too. This does not have a pathway in for the logs that I can see, but if you have a tool, which I will show you in a moment, I will go into the command line because a lot of us here, I know a lot of the community that showed up that knows me might be using ColdFusion. So let's jump over. Okay, so which one do we have here? Okay, that's DevOps. So going to go into my dev. Demo. Nope, actually I was going to open a workspace for those of you who are familiar with it. There we go. So in my workspace here, I have my API, which is done in ColdFusion, the UI, which is done in Vue. So we'll go in here and we'll look at my Docker Compose file. And you see I have the same thing here. I have my tags. And when this was in the same file as the DevOps file, you can add this depends on to make sure that your registry, which was the container I was running against, is started before this one tries to be created. Because I'm pulling from my local registry, I needed my registry server running before I called and pulled the image from that server. So this is another one of those neat commands. Another thing is if you use container name here, that keeps Docker from creating funky longer names. And you can do the same thing down here in networks, except you'll notice, yes, the world of software development. It's container names up here and it's name down here. And like you saw in the other place, it's volume and it's networks, images. So I don't know why volume is singular. So with that, you see I'm using this network here, which that same network was also given in the DevOps folder. So doing that, when this spins up, if you want Traefik to be able to see this, you are going to want to share the same network. So that's the reason for that. And you see this, I repeat this part down here through all of these. That's part of how Traefik knows where to segment it. So doing that, I can go Docker, no, not equals. So this is practically the only command I have to type regular. And you see, now the dev API is up. But I'm going to go back to here. Now see, this is starting. And I come over to the logs, and you can see as I'm trying to scroll up to see the top, it keeps doing that. That's why I said you'll want to do that. Now I can get all the information. And if I were running the admin locally, I can get the password here and go in, and then that's the default password. Excuse me. Again, here's all the other information. Aha, it's not started all the way yet. It says it's still starting. Oops, not logs. I wanted to go here. This is having a problem starting. This is what happens during demos, isn't it? Yes, ACF engines can definitely take a while to start. That is correct, Paul. And this one is having an issue starting at the moment. So let me see if I can see anything in my logs that says why that's having an issue. Another thing, as this spins up, you can come over here and let's see, this should be dev API. So we can go in here and look at the labels. And we see that that label is correct, so you can validate that. Notice it also has the other metadata labels that were set when someone built the image. So the fact that I was running this just ahead of the thing doesn't change that it's going to be difficult for me. Let's see. So it says we found the image. We know that because it's running. So it did find that locally. So since there's an issue, this is what I'm going to do. I want to show you, because it is still running, it hasn't died on me. It's just still in start mode. So I'm going to go to console. Aha, there is no files here. So this is running the command box is running inside here when it runs its commands. So if that's true, I should be able to type box and spin that up. So you see that's also available here. And what I want to do is go back over here. Inside my code, I have nothing. So okay, index.html. And we see now we have index.html that I just created. So I'm just curious if we end up, if the lack of that file was what was giving it a problem. Nope, looks like it's still counting. Until it goes healthy, I can tell you that will not appear over here because that's one of the flags that it uses. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to restart it. And now it's healthy. It didn't like the fact that I had no files to serve. What do you know? So now that that has served and gave us a chance to show you how we troubleshoot this, see we have dev API here. So what we can do is go to dev API, and there's that file we just edited. So we change that. You see that's being served up from a container running inside of Docker. Now, what's interesting about that is even though this is my development machine, on this machine, I do not have Node. I do not have a Java or a ColdFusion on the core machine. The only place those exist is here in the container. So doing that, I'm able to do the full containerized style of development. But now I want to show you again, because I said, you know, let's let the developer do things the way the developer wants to. And why don't I do this? We'll add just a little bit of size to the font. And we're going to go in here to the Docker container. Okay, here it is. I'm going to right click on this and attach a shell. So now I'm actually connected to the DOS prompt inside the container from Visual Studio Code. Create app. And what will we call it? No, it's not create. Let's see, this would be cold box create app. So you see, I'm doing this from inside the application. So I didn't have to install command box outside of the application. I have a trick that I did to do that, and I will be publishing something to show other people how to do this, because this was something I wanted to do because this is a newer machine I'm working on. And one of the things I want to do in my development machine is to stop directly installing and uninstalling stuff that mess up my dev machine. Anyone here ever had a machine go down because you had too many things installed and they started conflicting with each other and broke? Well, going this pathway, you can have less things breaking.
John, Paul was asking what you were using as the health check.
The health check for this is one that Ortus built in. It's part of their default ColdBox container. I have used them, but when it comes to those health checks, let's see, come over here. This is a good place for everybody to just know to start looking for information. The Docker docs are really good. The bigger problem with Docker is it's just WTMI, way too much information. So much so that I had to make that into a 4-letter word. And just the amount of information is overwhelming. The thing I like about these tools I'm showing you is they get that information so it's right there when you actually, with Portainer or Docker Desktop with the actual desktop UI, or with Visual Studio Code, this pulls all that stuff right local to you. So as you're learning it and as you have the questions, that information is closer to you. And that's very nice. So this ought to be done. And now we come back over here. And what we see is now our code folder. Look at that. It's all full up. So if we go back, if we go back there, I was about to say, I'm curious. Yeah, that's what I thought it would do. I know why. Does anyone else? I just haven't tried that before. Okay. So now we have all these files in there. Does anybody know why it's not running yet? Because they weren't there. So going to Portainer. I'm going to select this, restart it. And you can see here it says it's starting. And these do start up a little slower. Some containers start fast, some start slow. So. Oh, and the answer about the health check, by the way. Let's see, where is it here? There's actually information in here about that health check, so you can see what's going on. And now it's healthy and running. So now that it's started up, voila. So here's a freshly installed copy, except what I want you to see is even though I went into the container to the command line to do that, oh, wrong one. I did go into the container, but if you look here, I said I want your left is always outside, your right is inside. So the app folder inside my container actually looks at the code folder over here on the actual hard drive. So if I go in here, I go to Views, Main, index.cfm, go back to, so see the welcome cold box? That's actually this welcome message. So we'll stick 3 of those around it. And you can see that. And we'll go into our code to main CFC. And you can see standard code. I have all the models handlers just like before. Okay, so what do we, where's my message? There it is. So you can see I'm developing with my code inside of Windows, but I'm actually running the code as if it were a remote drive that it's watching from the container. And that's what that volume is for.
John, Paul has another comment. It says, that seems odd you need to restart every time you add new files. That's not been my experience when developing with Decoker and CFML.
Well, actually, you don't have to do it every time you add files. You have to restart for it to see the core files. If I come over to my main and change this to new, save that, come over to my main folder here. Actually, oh, you know what? Why did it? Did I not save my main? Ah, nobody told me I clicked on the wrong one. There we go. So you can see that new is a new file that this is spitting out. Basically, when it spins up, it has to have the files there, at least the basic files. Other words, command box can't serve the server up. So that's just the fact that when command box first starts, it wanted something to serve. And I'm sure Brad is going to tell me I'm wrong and I did something wrong, and I am open to the learning. But as you see, you can add new files and stuff, and just like standard in command box, if you want to go in there and get the things so it'll do something different, you will need to re-init occasionally just because it needs to see, because you've added a new handler or you've added something like that. When you do that, you have to do that with command box, whether you're inside or outside. So.
Okay, he said he wasn't familiar with command box, so that's why he was confused. And I read decoker, and I thought, oh, this is another Docker thing, and he actually mistyped it. It was Docker all along. So
okay,
he thanked you. Now he understands.
Right, it is a command box thing, and that's because command box has extra stuff. Like if you use ColdBox 6, anyone here ever had the joy of writing code that uses ColdFusion threads? ColdBox 6 uses the Java threading capability, and it does threading like your brain thinks it should. And you don't have to rewire your brain to figure out how to make the threads work right. So with command box, ColdBox 6, etc., there are definitely some advantages there. But as an application architect, I have 2 rules that I follow. The guys that work with me know this because I quote them often. Rule number 1, with every choice you make, there's trade-offs. And I like what the other architects that I read comment. If you don't think there's any trade-offs, you haven't used it long enough to know. Now, the trade-off still may be the right decision, but there's always trade-offs. And rule number 2, why is more important than how. ColdBox is a how. Command box is a how. Docker is a how. The bigger question as a developer is why? Well, let me give you an example. There we go. I'll shrink this back down. When I first spun this up to work with this file, it was Portainer version 2.0 point something. And when I was showing someone this at work, I think it was last Monday, not yesterday, but the week before, they went to 2.1.0. And the next day I showed this to someone else at work, and they went to 2.1.1. When they did that, all I did was I came in here, I changed that number, and I went and typed Docker compose up, and the Portainer starts faster than a ColdFusion development server will. This thing spun up. When I said Docker compose up, I did have to wait for the new image to download the first time, but it spun up literally in seconds. It was less than 10 seconds. Portainer was up. It was on the secure port. And that's what upgrades are normally like for Docker, for MySQL, for Microsoft SQL. And yes, you can run Microsoft SQL on Linux if you do not know that. Microsoft has dedicated a lot of energy and time into that. In fact, right now on Azure services, Microsoft's cloud services, Microsoft has proudly stated that they have more Linux servers running than they have Windows servers. So Microsoft is very intentional. They support and welcome Linux. They would still like you to buy Windows, but you know. But that's the desktop. We're talking about servers. So you see how we use labels for Traefik, and we can auto wire something up. And I showed you a version, how all of that stuff works. And now back to Rick's note. He asked a question about this. We're going to go back to Docker Hub. Okay, and we're going to go to. Now, Adobe has a different address. If you use Adobe ColdFusion, you can look at your docs and they tell you where to pull this from. But you see, here's command box, the official Ortus package. Now, speaking of which, have any of you ever known that Lewis is sort of a document junkie? These are some of the best documents I have seen on any container anywhere and the whole Docker community. So kudos to Ortis for putting that together. I'm not sure if he did it or he just attracted people that do this good job at the work. But Rick asked a question about versioning. That's what tags are. And these tags, see here, Adobe 2021 Alpine snapshot, you can just come here and click and it'll pull that server and pull it down and run it. So you see they have all kinds of these in here. So let's say you're after Adobe 2018. You can type that in here and you can see it'll narrow it down. And it'll also show you the different versions. And Ortis does a real good job about having a command box container for your version of Lucy, for your version of Adobe, whether it's 2018, 2021, 2016. They just have done a real good job of making containers available with all of these. So does that answer your question, Rick?
Yes, it does.
Now, when you're fortunate enough to have someone with really good docs like this, they come through and here they're giving you the command lines. Remember I talked about Docker pull and Docker run? Let me do this. There we go. Docker pull and Docker run. And again, if you type the Docker run and it's not there, it will go ahead and pull it automatically. See the P here? Well, that's because this internal port will not be visible unless you share it externally or unless you're using a tool like Traefik, which allows you to hook the domain to it. This is the volume like I did. And what they're doing is they're the app folder inside of command box. You put the path to your app over here on the left side, and that's how that works. And Ortis Solutions is the people who are managing these repositories. Command box is the image that's being managed in this repo. And see, they have more good notes here. Here's how to do some more detailed with secure. So, and here's all the different environment variables that you can set so that you can give more details. And here's, I think it was Paul that asked about health check. Here's the information on health check. I knew this was here, but I mentioned it was here to try and trigger myself to come back. This is how they set it, but you can actually set your own health check just by creating an environment variable, which means in the root folder where you do your Docker compose, you just have a .env file and you put this variable in there equals, and then you put what your target is for your health check, and that's it. And like they say, this one runs at a 20-second interval. So you see it has lots of good environment variables in there. So pretty cool stuff. So other than that, you're just doing ColdFusion code. You point it at the correct directory and you run it, and you're just doing ColdFusion code. The harder thing about development is we don't usually think about running servers. And when you start having a whole bunch of command lines where you're creating a network, you're creating a volume, and you've got all that stuff in different places, well, that starts to get confusing. So it's good to learn the command line, and there's several places you can do that. But once you learn those, you ought to really swap over to doing it this style, because this is just a whole lot simpler. And see, this is registry with a tag 2, because that's version 2. I did the same thing here. And yes, you can run Jenkins. I'm just setting this up because, again, this is a newer machine. But so yes, here you have Jenkins. And by the way, as a developer, if you can get over here and learn the Jenkins pipelines, that is something very, very good to learn. It's what we call configuration as code. Not a topic for tonight, but definitely a good thing to learn. So yes, you can run Jenkins on your local machine. You can do all kinds of things. So does anybody have any particular type of projects or questions that something you would like me to repeat and go back and cover? I can tell you that I'm planning to actually put a more detailed course together on this. And what I want to do when I create the course is get some volunteers to go over the course. So if someone would like to be in on that, if I'm working with you on a course and you have questions, then I don't know, while I don't know everything about Docker, I can definitely be a live tutor for your Docker as you go through. But so I'm hoping to start kicking that out in about a month. So if anyone is interested, definitely let me know.
Okay, John, one of the things that I thought about when you went over it is that those Docker, I guess for lack of a better name, commands, yes, they look like YAML. So is that a case where you write those scripts by hand, or does the Docker app just create them by you clicking on different things?
What you will do if you're a normal developer getting started is you will copy them from Stack Trace or just off some Google search, and you will just do slight modifications. And that's what most people are doing. But yes.
Has someone written them publicly out there that work with ColdFusion or Lucy, where a lot of the stuff is already there?
If you look at Ortis's libraries, for instance, at their repos, you will see these type of files in there. I think I'm one of the first ones in the community using Traefik, but I have a feeling it will catch on really fast, because as nice as Nginx is, when you want to do something different, it gets really confusing. And figuring out how to tie an SL cert into Nginx, well, I haven't seen anyone really release a common thing that shows that. So.
Okay, I know one of the Lucy developers had, but he wasn't involved in, certs or anything. He just had a basic way to configure Lucy with Nginx as a.
Here's on the screen a really good developer's repo. Since you know who this is.
So for those not aware, that is our friend online here, Nick Kwiatkowski.
So I will make this just a little bigger so it's easier to read. But oh, by the way, here's a change. And Nick, I don't know if you've heard this. You know this version that we've been doing in the top of our Docker Compose files? It still matters if you're doing Swarm, but if you're using a modern Docker engine, Docker desktop, you no longer need the version. All the 2 and 3 stuff runs side by side together now.
Yeah, it always defaults to the latest, but I've actually been caught a few times where I I did a particular thing that was very specific to like version 3.2 or whatever, and then version 3.3 or 3.4, they changed some of the defaults. So it's always best practice to declare those.
Well, actually, according to Brett, what's his name, Fisher, or the doctor, he said he doesn't do it anymore. He's stopped. He's taken the declaration out as of a month ago.
Yeah, and that's assuming that you're always, at the absolute latest version of Docker, and you're using the latest version of Docker for everything that you do, which in his case would.
Yeah, he probably would be, and I agree with you. So, but for someone who's new and just learning, they will probably make less mistakes with it out. Once you get more skilled, if you come across an issue, then you'll know. But see here, so he created a service called the front end. This is the image, and this that he's doing is a development thing. When this is a good habit for me to teach you, this you do in development, but once you get it past initial development and push towards release, you want to literally be naming the version, because you don't want it to actually, in a release version, be pulling, say you've updated this image, but that's not the image you're running in production. You want to make sure that when you're doing a hot fix against production, it's running in the same version as your production server.
Yeah, so and you'll see there's a Docker Compose and a Docker Compose prod. There's a difference for them. So.
And I was going to, because I did see you had that. See, here is prod. Oh, this one has latest too. Nick.
Yeah, these are so.
Yeah, these are sample files. I am sure Nick, because he has these prod as a separate thing, you just have to grade your example because someone won't know that. So, and you see the same thing here. This is the port inside the Docker network, which is isolated. You have to tell Docker to share this with the outside world. This is another cool thing. You can actually set secret variables here, so you can share a configuration and hide your secrets so that you don't put your secret variables in a common repo. So that's possible to do that here. And you see here, this is a specific version of MySQL, because if you get the version 8 or whatever they are, some things will break. So you want to be running that version. So I'm guessing the thing he has up here it's a skeleton, it's a demo. So latest is not going to matter. I completely agree with him. And see here,
Paul just posted another Docker CFML repo in the comments.
So, and down here, let's see, where's my pointer? You can see here, this creates a consistent volume. And let's see, I'm not sure where that's used, but here he's using the secrets again. So we'll click on
that volume there. The voldb essentially just captures.
Oh,
so
I see it.
There's voldb. So essentially we're persisting the database.
Right, it's right here. Thank you.
Yep.
I just missed it. I have a little bit of glare on my screen, so there was literally a glare where I was looking. And the same, here's another Docker Compose YAML. And by the way, also with the Visual Studio's tools, you can just do Compose YAML, and that will work. You don't have to do Docker-Compose YAML to have it see that as a default anymore. What you do is you just right-click on it, and it'll give you an option, Docker Compose up. So, like I say, this is fine for development. Just remember, when you go to production, try to avoid latest. And if you're spinning up multiple containers and you wanted to look up at multiple versions of this, You could put one on 8501, one on 8502, and you could have them literally running side by side by side. And of course, you will have to put that port number in your URL. So, and by the way, see this? Except EULA, that's an environment variable. And what it does is when it spins up, it lets you walk past having to validate that. I love environment variables. That is one of the best things I have in the last 3 years. They have become a thing of passion with me. So. And this is, look at this. This is when we thought the version was going to be 2020. Apparently it was ColdFusion 2021, so I do appreciate that. I always hate it when someone's product sort of leaks into the next year and they name it last year's number. So I really appreciate Adobe actually naming it 2021. So yes, and this is a YAML file for all of you who don't know what that means. That means everything has to be indented to the same level to have the same significance. And if your indentation is off, it cries and it complains and it refuses to work. But Visual Studio Code is really good about getting that lined up for you. So. Is there any other questions? Yeah, that's my email. If someone wants to contact me, is interested in being, here's my reason for doing this course this way. When I write a book, I found out that my book that I wrote was pretty good, but there were some issues with it. And the issues weren't because of just technical things. They're actually because I make assumptions that another technical reviewer also has that same level of knowledge. And when we deliver that to the end user, well, there's a gap. And a lot of people have that gap. So what we do is we do good creation. We know I'm going from point A to point Z, and we follow that track, and someone else makes sure we're following that same pattern, but it doesn't match the actual learner's experience. So we do good creation, we do good QA, but there's this thing we have in our larger institutions called user acceptance testing. And far too often when we create technical education, we forget to do the user acceptance testing phase. So we create all these courses and they bomb. I created a jQuery course a while back and I added that to it. And before Learnable.com changed the commission plan, the people were getting what they needed from the course because I did that UAT phase. And because it's so rare, my jQuery course went viral. And I was about ready to quit my regular job and just create courseware and then they changed the commission structure. Who knew? I'm glad that they did that 2 weeks before I planned to hand in my goodbye notice, because my profit from the thing in 1 month went to 1/5 the profit, then 1/10 in the next month. My family would not have been eating well on that income. So, but I did learn the importance of doing user acceptance testing, or what I call learnable. You know, the student has to be able to learn. And I don't know about you, I've taken too many courses, read too many blog articles, and it's really obvious to me the person who wrote it does not go back and fix it once it hits the public. Ben Nadel is really good about going back and fixing his articles. And some other guys are, but it's not common. So again, here's Docker Desktop, and you see here's the API that I spun up. Here's a command line into the API from Docker Desktop. I don't know, will this expand? This one won't get bigger, I'm sorry guys. But I can see here's inside here, and you can see by default, the way this is set up, and it's something I didn't want to cover tonight because if you have newer people, it's just too much, but there's another phase after you get this and you're ready to go to production, or if you're creating a special container for doing your Docker development, you can do this and set it up. So it has all kinds of pre-settings. And what you notice here is when I did a directory, that's the actual development folder. But see now, when I moved to the root folder, it moved back here. So if I go look at my directory in the app folder, that's the folder we were actually in. And if you look in the Docker Compose file, oops, that's data. I'm sorry. Okay. Oh, I am confused. This is, okay, I've lost my, oh, I know what's wrong. That's in this other workspace. Here we go. So you see my code folder is pointing to the app folder in that container. So I could, when you spin it up, that's how you attach the volume internally. If you need to do this in more detail, there is a mount command that will give you additional power. As a developer, you rarely will need that. So. And I did want to, speaking of which, while we're this is MKCert. So this is just talking about how to pull it down. Let's see, I'm trying to get to the repo. Well, they have a repo. And this is why I wanted to come over here, because I remember this was difficult over here because they don't give you a, there we go. So here's the actual repo. It's Lucasa MKCert. This is not a new thing. It's been out for a while. And again, I will add actual walking through showing people how to do that on Windows. I will see if I can get it running. I have a smaller Mac here, so I'm not sure if I can get it running on the Mac. So it doesn't have as much memory, so I'll have to be a little more skimpy on that. But that's what I have. So if there's any more questions, glad to entertain them. Basically, what Docker is you're creating a virtual computer, a fake computer that runs inside your system and pretends to be a computer, and it runs the code on the fake computer instead of on your actual system. that creates an isolated system, and it keeps you from having to install Node or command box or all these other things. So it keeps your actual system cleaner. And there may be times where you have projects where you need to run Lucy version 5 and Lucy version 5.3 for two different services. Well, you can run them both on the same machine, and you don't have to go through IIS and do weird configurations and fight your way through that. When you run the stuff in containers, it's easier to run two different versions side by side, or say you're running ColdFusion 2016 and 2018, or 2012, whatever the versions were. So you can run them all side by side. When you're done, take them offline. They do a hot fix. Oh, hot fixes are much easier using this technology. You will hate it if you learn to do this in Docker and you ever have to go back and update your production servers the other way.
So if you have consulting clients, you could have a Docker container with however they're set up, version and other software for each one, and just go back and forth and not have to worry about something that worked on your machine, but when you moved it to their server, it didn't work.
You reduce it drastically. But it is technology and we're humans. So the fact that it should work does not limit our capacity to break it. It will just reduce it drastically.
Okay. I can see how that could have been handy back in the day for me.
Yeah, I wish it was out.
What overhead have you got on the server? I mean, you're running this software. Obviously, on your own machine, the advantages outweigh it, and hopefully most developers have fast machines, but could you serve?
You do not need this type of machine to run it. If you can read there, I have 40 gig. And I'm running a 6-core hyper-threaded machine.
So Rick, I run a bunch of machines in ColdFusion instances in Docker on AWS, and I get away very easily with a T2 small on those, which is a 1 gig or 1 gig of RAM for medium-sized servers.
Right.
Essentially, I find that it. Pardon?
I don't think Adobe CF would run in 1 gig. Lucy, maybe.
Oh, yeah, so I run all my stuff on Lucy, not ACF, but the Docker, because the images that at least that Lucy provides are Docker optimized, I find that I actually get better throughput running it in Docker than I do non-Docker on a server. So.
Oh wow.
I wouldn't say it's like 10% difference or whatever, but it's enough where I can squeeze a little more performance out of it because they do some optimizations with it.
That's good to know. I always assumed that you were losing 10 or 15% of your possible speed, but apparently not the case. I think that's important to know.
You can see the memory load here.
What, John?
You can see the memory load here. So just in reference, although I'm obviously not running any load on these, it's just the stuff on there. I'm going to stop all the containers.
Are you still presenting?
So you see that didn't dent much memory.
No, I don't think it was more than about 2 gig at most.
So
did you have running?
About 8 or 9. So it's not much. It's basically, if you're doing processing in your containers, it takes more. Of course, it'll impact it more, but it's, other than that, nothing significant. It's actually, especially if you're running Lucy, it's lighter. And for those of you who haven't heard, Lucy is actually, their next work is to shift to Lucy 6. So that apparently is finally coming.
Yeah, man.
It would have come out earlier, but they focused on rolling when Oracle and Sun, whatever it is, did all their Java-controlled new licensing deals. That forced them to shift what they were doing and focus on making sure everything ran on open source Java. So they, I guess, are pretty satisfied with that. So that is the official, that is a public answer they gave me. So.
Well, it should bring the
in regards to the Docker taking up more space and all that type of stuff. Docker takes advantage of new things that were put into the kernels and new things that were put into the processors over the last probably 10 years or so to allow virtualization to happen with really little impact. Docker specifically has versions of Linux that it runs on that are very, very minimal. They use, I think, like 4 megs or 8 megs of RAM and things like that. The hard drive space on those is like 25 or 50 megs or something like that for the very base image. So if you look at the Alpine ones or some of those, so they're really designed for very lightweight, so you can run a bunch of these together. That's kind of the whole point of the containerization piece of it.
And I will tell you this, you can run typically ColdFusion with Windows System Linux on your system with less resources than running it right on Windows.
Interesting.
Yeah, it is. It's like, what? How in the world is this running faster with a lower load? Well, Microsoft was intentional. They intend to support Linux. They have their own Linux distribution, so it's mainly aimed at WSL. But when you run it, you can, like I do, I run a Ubuntu and I run stuff there also. So.
Sounds like that could almost be a meeting by itself in the future. It's just getting set up, have everybody back when we're meeting in person with their machines and get the Windows version of Linux set up and running.
Mm-hmm. Well, I can tell you this. What does it take to set up a new developer? You buy a new machine and you want to set it up for development.
Well, it's time consuming. You're saying with Docker, you could just type a couple commands and they get at the same.
Here's what you do with Docker Desktop. I plan on making a utility for Visual Studio Code that'll pull a whole pack of plugins in one sweep. So you load code, you load your extensions, you load Git, and you load Docker Desktop. You're ready to go. Because you pull your Git file down, you run Docker Compose up, and you start coding. And of course, if you're creating something, you would have to create that. But
I could see that could help the community quite a bit, John.
Yeah, it's like 20 times faster for setting up a developer if your machine crashes. Do you know what the recovery time is? It's like this, using Docker Desktop, because I had another machine over here. My daughter is taking Animation Mentor School online. She chose it not because they have one of the highest dropout rates, but because the instructors are from Pixar and Disney and stuff like that. And they have one of the higher rates. And she decided when she was going to get schooling, she wanted to get hired more than she wanted to complete it. Well, the problem is she's sort of OCD in the topic, and she's using my souped up machine over there. I didn't get access to my machine, so it was either take someone who's really excited about their career and bump them, or go and buy another one. Well, with Docker Desktop, that's what I did. I reinstalled those things, and I don't have ColdFusion running on this. I don't have Node running on it, but I can still do Vue.js development. I can still do ColdFusion development because they run inside of Docker Desktop.
So I take it that's a desktop machine with all that RAM?
I added the memory. It came with 16, but one was removable, and Crucial told me I could stick a 32 in there. I did.
Yeah, when I was looking for my machine a couple of years ago, I'd always doubled RAM back from the days when, you know, you had under 640K, and
yes.
I couldn't find a laptop at the time that supported on the motherboard 32 gigs of RAM. They do now, not all of them. Hey, Randy. You got some questions for John?
No, I was just letting them know that I'm here. You know, didn't want them to miss me or anything. Hey, John, long time no see.
Oh, by the way, Docker Desktop. Last month they do community meetings. They're trying to do them once a month. We'll see how long or if that'll continue with the Docker company. It was when they came out with Desktop 3.0, simultaneously they released a beta that runs on Apple Silicon.
I actually got that new machine, John. I have no complaints out of that chip right now. No spinning wheel, no fan, no heat, just freaking works.
I only had one complaint because I'm a memory junkie. I wanted at least 32.
Yeah, I
so
did
I
get
have to wait.
16. I waited for the 16.
I gotta say, some of the people with the 8 are having problems in that it's shelling out to their hard drive, and they're afraid it'll burn the hard drive out. Because it's so much traffic. SSDs are a little more fragile. That was something they were talking about in Hacker News. And
yeah.
By the way, you guys, on Slack, there's a couple of good groups, and if you guys haven't heard it, Ortis has a new community where they're trying to. The community is run on. It's a discourse-based community, I think, and the reason for that is they feel like a lot of good questions and answers go through, and Slack, you can't go back and find them. So that's the reason for the community.
Gotcha.
I don't think they're trying to outdo the vibrant, fantastic Adobe community online. Apparently, I'm not afraid of being controversial. I appreciate Adobe's community, but they need to do some UAT testing and do some pivots if they really want that thing to take off. And I appreciate Charlie and all the guys that blog up there, and ladies. I don't know. We need to get some lady bloggers. I don't know. Do we have any community lady bloggers right now? No wonder we're lopsided.
They need to get ColdFusion bloggers back on the online. There are 2 alternatives though to it right now. CF Note, and I can't remember the other one.
So,
well, do you want to call this then, John? We don't have any more questions.
I think we could just have general community chat if they want to. If not, we can. Do we call a recording either way?